It was curiosity, nothing more. That her defiance merely intrigued him as a ruler, not as a man. But the lie was wearing thin. Each night when the palace slept, Kyle found himself walking the echoing corridors toward the dungeon. The guards pretended not to notice. The king's steps were law, even when they led into shadow. He would stop before her cell, silent, watching through the iron bars. Lyra was always awake. Sometimes she hummed softly, not in sorrow, but in defiance. Sometimes she stared back at him unflinching, her gaze sharp enough to draw blood. She never begged, never cried. It should have infuriated him. Instead, it made his pulse quicken with something dangerous, something he had not felt in years. Inside him, the ice began to crack. It started small, a hesitation in his commands, a warmth in his voice when he questioned her, a flicker of guilt when she shivered. He told himself it was strategy, that he was studying her willpower, testing what made her strong. But the truth clawed deeper. Lyra stirred emotions he thought long buried beneath duty and power. He remembered the old witch's curse, the one whispered through the empire, that the Alpha King's heart had been sealed in frost, that no touch of light could thaw it. For years he believed it. He had built his throne on ice and silence, convincing himself that love was a weakness for men who didn't rule kingdoms. But now, her voice haunted him. Because I was never yours to command. Those words echoed louder than the council of generals, louder than the roar of crowds who worshipped his strength. She had spoken them not as a challenge, but as a truth he had never heard before. Each time he saw her, the world around him seemed less certain. The air felt warmer, the walls less solid, and the part of him that had slept for so long, the part that once knew compassion, maybe even love, stirred painfully awake. He hated it. He needed it. When he returned to his chambers, his reflection in the mirror startled him. The same cold eyes stared back, but beneath them burned something he couldn't name, something he feared would destroy everything he had built. The King of Ice was melting, and it terrified him. Kyle had long believed that mercy was a weakness, a crack in the armor of a king. Yet every time he looked at Lyra, something within that armor began to tremble. Her courage was a mirror reflecting everything he had lost: compassion, warmth, and the ability to feel without fear. He remembered the boy he once was, the prince who used to sneak out of the palace to feel the rain on his skin, who believed justice meant fairness, not control. But that boy had died the day he took the throne. He had buried him beneath iron laws, endless wars, and the cold silence of power. Until Lyra. She never bowed, never begged. Even when her life hung by a thread, she met his gaze with the same steady fire that could have burned empires. There was no calculation in her defiance, only truth. And truth, Kale realized, was something he hadn't seen in years. One night, he stood before her cell again. The torchlight flickered across her face, dirt-streaked, exhausted, but unbroken. "You should fear me," he said quietly, almost as if testing himself. Lyra tilted her head. "I fear losing myself more than I fear you." Her words struck harder than any blade. For a long time, Kyle said nothing. His hand brushed against the iron bars, feeling their chill, the same chill that had ruled his heart for so long. How strange, he thought, that one prisoner could make the king feel captive in his own walls. He turned away, but her voice followed him. "Do you ever wonder what kind of man you were before the throne took you?" That night, Kale didn't sleep. The ghosts of his past crowded his dreams, his mother's smile, his brother's laughter, the warmth of a world that once felt alive. And through it all, he saw Lyra's eyes, fierce, unyielding, human. The king, who had conquered nations, found himself conquered by a single truth. He wasn't cold by nature. He was cold by choice. And her courage was melting the choice away. The echoes of rebellion were no longer whispers. They were roars across the borders. Word had spread that the Alpha King was growing soft, that a mere Omega had stirred defiance within his walls. Neighboring Alphas saw it as weakness, an opportunity to strike, to claim the throne that once inspired fear in every heart. Kale's council gathered in the war chamber, their faces hard and expectant. The table was spread with maps, troop reports, and blood-red markers of enemy movement. "My king," said General Varric, his voice cutting through the tense air. "3 armies march from the northern ridge. They believe your bond with the Omega has dulled your strength. They mean to test it." Kale's jaw tightened. The torches reflected in his steel-gray eyes as he stared at the map, tracing the borders where smoke already rose. "Let them come," he murmured. "They will learn that my heart may thaw, but my crown does not." Still, something inside him wavered. Every choice now carried her shadow. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "I was never yours to command." In the silence of his chambers that night, he stood by the window overlooking the valley. Below, the soldiers marched in silver formation, loyal, disciplined, deadly. But even as he prepared for war, his thoughts drifted to the dungeon far below, where one Omega's defiance had changed everything. War was coming, and Kale could not afford distractions. Yet Lyra was no longer a distraction. She was a reminder of what he might lose if the darkness consumed him again. When dawn came, he ordered her moved from the prison to the palace gardens, under his protection. Rumors spread like wildfire through the court. The king had freed the Omega. The war drums beat louder, and somewhere between power and defiance, fate was preparing to test them both. The council demanded swift alliances, treaties sealed with blood, or worse, marriages of convenience. Yet Kale's thoughts strayed from the polished halls of diplomacy to the dim corridors below, where Lyra's presence lingered like a forbidden flame. Each day, reports arrived, enemy forces advancing, allies hesitating. The crown needed strength, unity, heirs. But Kale found none of that in the nobles who groveled before him. Their smiles hid daggers. Their oaths reeked of greed. When the war council dispersed, Kale walked the torchlit passage toward the lower wing, a place no king should linger. The guards bowed as he passed, their faces pale. The dungeon had changed since Lyra's arrival. Where despair once ruled, now there was a strange, unsettling quiet. He found her standing by the barred window of her cell, moonlight soft against her face. Chains still clasped her wrists, but she held herself with the dignity of someone unbroken. "You should hate me," Kyle said, his voice low, almost unsure. Lyra met his gaze without fear. "You expect hate to make me small, but it only makes me remember who I am." Her words struck deeper than any blade. Kale turned away, masking the tremor in his breath. "You defy the order of this realm," he said coldly. "An Omega challenging an Alpha is treason." "Then call me treason," she whispered. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy, dangerous. The king, feared by armies, found himself disarmed by a prisoner's courage. Her presence stirred memories he thought long buried. The boy he once was, the man he could have been. Outside, thunder rumbled, a storm gathering over the empire. The kingdom's fate demanded alliances, not distractions. But as Kale watched the girl in chains lift her chin toward the lightning-split sky, he knew the truth he could never admit. He needed an army. But what he craved was her fire. The moon hung heavy above the fortress, its pale light spilling through the marble corridors. The palace slept, or so it seemed. For a heartbeat there was only silence. Lyra knelt on the floor, blood seeping through her torn sleeve, chest heaving. Kale dropped his sword and moved toward her, his hand steady though his heart was not. "You could have died," he said, his voice a rare whisper of fear. "I could have," she breathed, meeting his gaze. "But then so would you." Her words unsettled him, not for their truth, but for their meaning. No one had ever risked their life for the king. No one had ever cared if he lived or died. As guards stormed the chamber, Kale waved them off. His attention stayed fixed on Lyra, this defiant Omega who had once sworn she would never bow, now standing before him not as a servant but as his savior. When he reached for her injured arm, she flinched, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar tenderness in his touch. "Why save me?" he asked quietly. She smirked faintly despite the blood. "Because I hate owing debts, even to kings." Cale almost smiled, but the thought died in his throat. For the first time, he realized she wasn't just fire. She was light in a kingdom drowning in darkness. And as the assassin's body cooled beside them, he knew that something far more dangerous had been set in motion that night. Not rebellion, not treason, but something neither of them could control. The morning after the assassination attempt, the palace buzzed with whispers. Servants spoke of shadows in the king's chamber and an Omega who had spilled blood for the crown. None dared speak her name aloud, not when it was the king himself who had ordered her moved. Lyra expected punishment for stepping beyond her place. Instead, armored guards escorted her through golden corridors she had only glimpsed from afar. At the end stood massive obsidian doors engraved with the royal crest. The captain bowed stiffly. By the king's decree, the prisoner is to serve in the royal quarters. Lyra blinked, confused. "You mean I'm not to be executed?" "Execution?" The captain's eyes flickered uneasy. "You saved His Majesty's life. That makes you—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Valuable." When the doors opened, she stepped into another world. The air was warm, perfumed with burning amber. Silk curtains framed arched windows, and tapestries of wolves and moons draped the stone walls. It was nothing like the cold dungeons she had known, and yet it felt no less like a cage. Cale stood by the window, his expression unreadable. The sunlight cut across his sharp features, turning his eyes the color of molten steel. "You'll stay here," he said simply. "You'll serve me and me alone." Lyra's chin lifted. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll return to the cells," he replied, voice calm but laced with warning. "Your freedom is conditional, Omega. You've earned the right to live, not to defy." Her jaw tightened, yet she said nothing. It wasn't full freedom, but it was enough. Enough to breathe, enough to think, enough to plan. As the guards left, Cale's tone softened just a fraction. "Your bravery last night, it was reckless." "Courage always looks reckless to a king," she countered, folding her arms. His lips twitched, almost a smile. "Then perhaps I need more recklessness in my halls." That evening, Lyra was shown to her new quarters, a modest chamber adjoining the king's. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once a prisoner, now a shadow of power living in the heart of danger. But as she gazed out at the crimson horizon, one truth lingered in her chest. She might serve in his private wing, but she would never belong to him. Not yet. By dawn, the palace was alive with whispers. Servants lingered in corridors longer than usual, pretending to polish vases or sweep the same patch of marble floor, their voices low and urgent. "The Omega who saved him. She's still alive?" one maid breathed. "Not just alive," another whispered back. "She's living in his private wing." The guards pretended not to hear, but even they exchanged curious glances. In the royal kitchens, the gossip turned wild. Some claimed the king had fallen under her spell. Others said she was a witch, using forbidden charms to soften his iron heart. By noon, the court was in uproar. Nobles murmured during council meetings, their jeweled fingers drumming impatiently on the table. "The king favors the prisoner," the chancellor said, unable to hide his disgust. "What message does this send? That defiance earns reward?" Cale's gaze was cold as winter steel. "It sends the message that loyalty is not limited to rank." The room fell silent. None dared challenge him further. Yet beneath the surface, resentment brewed. An Omega had never been so close to the throne, and that alone threatened the balance of power. Meanwhile, Lyra felt the weight of every glance as she walked the palace halls. Conversations stopped when she entered. Bowed heads followed her steps, some out of awe, others out of hate. That night, as she served Kyle his evening meal, she spoke softly without looking at him. "They think you've gone mad." Kyle's silver eyes lifted to hers. "And what do you think?" Lyra hesitated, then answered, "I think they might be right. You're protecting the very thing your kingdom despises." A slow smile tugged at his lips. "Perhaps I'm tired of a kingdom built on fear." For a heartbeat, the air between them thickened, not just with defiance, but something unspoken, dangerous. And beyond the palace walls, the rumors spread faster than wildfire. The king's heart has been stolen by the Omega in chains. Kyle, once known as the Wolf King, begins to change. The icy aura that once silenced his court starts to crack, melting in the quiet warmth of Lyra's defiance and quiet strength. He no longer shouts at servants. He no longer holds executions in the square. His decisions become slower, more thoughtful, as though her voice echoes in his mind before every decree. At night, when the palace sleeps, he visits her in the library, the only place she feels free. There, by the flicker of candlelight, she reads forbidden histories aloud to him, stories of love that defied power, of kings who chose mercy over might. Sometimes he listens in silence. Sometimes he challenges her words. But always, he stays. "You're changing," Lyra says one evening, closing a book softly. "Or perhaps I'm remembering," Kale replies, "what it means to be more than a weapon." Yet softness in a king is weakness in a court built on blood. The council begins to whisper that he's losing his edge. Generals question his orders. Even his most loyal advisor watches Lyra with thinly veiled hatred. "She's made you vulnerable," the advisor warns. "A king cannot rule with a trembling heart." But Kale's eyes, once cold, hold something dangerous now, not wrath but devotion. "Then let them see my heart tremble," he says quietly, "because I will not let her break." Lyra doesn't know it yet, but her presence has painted a target on them both. And outside the palace walls, rebellion begins to stir, ready to strike at the king's newfound weakness. Behind the golden doors of the war chamber, the royal council gathers, a circle of alphas bound not by loyalty, but fear. The air is thick with incense and deceit. "She's his weakness," the High Chancellor hisses. Every moment she breathes, his judgment falters. The court sees it, the armies sense it. The king's strength must be restored. "But how?" asks General Voren. "He won't harm her. We've seen his eyes. He's bound to her." A cruel smile spreads across the Chancellor's face. "Then let us use that bond to break him." They draft their plan in whispers, a staged rebellion, a fabricated threat that will reach the king through Lyra. They'll make it seem as if she's betrayed him, leaking royal secrets to the enemy. A forged letter, a false witness, a public accusation. If the king defends her, he loses the council's trust. If he condemns her, he loses his soul. Either way, they win. Days later, the trap is set. Lyra is summoned to deliver a message to the border garrison, a message she doesn't know is laced with treasonous lies. Kyle's advisors watch in silence as she departs under guard. None warn her, none meet her gaze. And when she's gone, the Chancellor speaks softly, almost gleefully. "Let the king's heart bleed before the throne." Back in the shadows of the war chamber, one man, Commander Aldrich, Kale's oldest friend, hesitates. His jaw tightens. "If she dies for your politics," he warns, "the king won't just bleed, he'll burn the world." But no one listens. The trap has been sprung, and Lyra walks straight into it, unaware that every step she takes is leading her deeper into betrayal. The grand banquet hall glitters with gold and deceit. Chandeliers blaze above as nobles raise jeweled goblets, laughter masking the venom in their hearts. Musicians play soft, haunting melodies, the kind used to hide tension beneath elegance. Lyra stands silently behind Kale's chair, dressed in silver silk that glows faintly under the candlelight. For the first time since her capture, she feels almost human again. Not a prisoner, not an Omega, but seen. The king's gaze meets hers briefly, a flicker of warmth, a promise unspoken. But the illusion shatters when the High Chancellor rises, goblet in hand. "Your Majesty," he begins, his voice slick as oil. There is a matter of grave concern that cannot wait until dawn. The music falters. The hall falls silent. Kale's eyes narrow. "Speak." The Chancellor steps aside, and two guards drag forward a trembling messenger, a young beta soldier, bruised and terrified. He holds a sealed letter stained with red wax. "This letter," the Chancellor declares, "was intercepted from a rebel courier. It bears the king's seal, and the words of this woman." He points straight at Lyra. A murmur ripples through the crowd. "Witch, spy, Omega." Kale rises slowly, his expression unreadable. "Explain yourself." Lyra's pulse races. "I don't know what this is. I swear it's not mine." But the Chancellor continues, his voice booming through the hall. "She was sent to the border with this message. Within it are orders revealing the king's troop movements. Information only someone within the palace could know." Gasps erupt. Goblets drop. "She's bewitched you, my king," another councilman shouts. "That's how she survived this long. The Omega is a witch sent to seduce and destroy." Guards move closer. Kale's jaw tightens, ice swirling faintly in the air around him, a warning of the storm within. "Careful," he growls. "You accuse her in my hall." The Chancellor bows mockingly. "Then let her prove her innocence, if she can." All eyes turn to Lyra. The once whispered rumors now scream across the marble floor. Witch, traitor, cursed. Kale looks torn between fury and disbelief. But when he finally speaks, his words cut through her like frost. "Take her to the dungeons," he commands quietly. Lyra's breath catches. "Kale," his eyes harden, "until I find the truth." The guard seize her wrists. The hall erupts in murmurs, and as she's dragged away, Lyra realizes the cruel truth. The same palace that once sheltered her now echoes with betrayal. And somewhere in the shadows, the Chancellor smiles. The trap worked. The night after the banquet, the palace is wrapped in silence, the kind that follows betrayal. Outside, snow drifts over the marble courtyards, turning the capital into a frozen grave of secrets. Inside, the king stands before the great window of his chamber, staring into the endless dark. Lyra's scream still echoes in his mind. "Kale, you know me." But now, she lies chained in the lower dungeons. The same girl who once defied him in the throne room, the same girl who saved his life. The crown on his desk gleams under the torchlight, mocking him. Its weight is not gold. It's blood, oaths, and duty. General Arden enters quietly, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the council demands her execution at dawn. The people whisper that you've been enchanted. If you do not act, they'll turn on you." Kale's eyes remain fixed on the horizon. "And if I kill her, then your throne will remain secure." Silence. But in that silence, Kale's heartbeat betrays him. Every memory of her, the fire in her eyes, the way she said monsters don't scare me, collides with the centuries of discipline he's built to survive. "Your Majesty," Arden presses. Kale turns, his expression unreadable. "Tell the council. I'll decide at dawn." When the general leaves, Kyle allows the mask to fall. He presses his hand to his chest, where warmth stirs, foreign and frightening. For years he's ruled with iron and frost. Compassion was weakness. Love was death. Yet now, the idea of a world without her feels colder than the ice in his veins. As the bells toll midnight, Kale stands between two choices: save her and lose everything he was born to protect, or destroy her and keep a kingdom not worth ruling. He grips the crown, and it cracks under his hand. Down in the dungeon, Lyra shivers in the dark, unaware that the king above is breaking too. The grand hall falls into a deadly hush. No one breathes, no one moves. The king's words strike like thunder, echoing against the marble pillars and the golden banners that line the walls. Lyra stands at the center, her wrists still bound in chains, bruised but unbroken. Around her, nobles gape in disbelief. The royal council freezes, parchment accusations slipping from trembling fingers. "Your Majesty," one of them dares to whisper, "surely you jest. She's an Omega, a prisoner, accused of witchcraft." Kyle descends the dais slowly, his black cloak rippling like a storm cloud. Each step carries the weight of authority that no one dares challenge. When he stops beside Lyra, he looks down at her, not as a ruler to a subject, but as something far more dangerous. "I said," he repeats, voice cold as iron. "She is under my protection." Gasps ripple through the court. General Arden grips his sword hilt. "Your Majesty, the council will not stand for this." Kyle turns and with one sharp glance, silences him. "Then they may stand outside my throne room until they learn obedience." Lyra looks up at him, confusion and defiance tangled in her gaze. She doesn't understand why he's doing this. Just hours ago, she thought her life was over. Now, the man she called a monster shields her before the world. The high priest rises shakily from his seat. "Your Majesty, such protection violates the old law. An Omega accused of treason cannot—" Kale's hand lifts, and the room chills instantly. Frost crawls across the marble floor, creeping toward the priest's feet until he stumbles back in terror. "The old law," Kale says evenly, "bows to me." For a heartbeat, the court sees not the cruel king they've feared for years, but something far more commanding. A man defying his own throne. When he turns to Lyra, his voice softens, meant only for her. "No one touches you again. Not while I live." She should feel relief. But instead her heart twists in fear. Because the moment Kale chose her, she knew. The council, the nobles, and the empire itself would rise against them both. And somewhere in the shadows a figure slips quietly out of the hall, carrying news that will ignite rebellion. The palace is silent under a silver moon. Beyond the towering glass windows, the kingdom sleeps, unaware that its king has just rewritten its laws for a single Omega. Lyra stands by the window of her new chamber, the silk gown they forced on her glowing faintly in the candlelight. It feels foreign on her skin, too soft, too binding. The same way kindness can be when it comes from a man who once wielded cruelty like a blade. The heavy door opens. Kale steps in, his dark cloak trailing frost across the marble. He studies her for a moment, his eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't be awake," he says quietly. "The healers said you needed rest." She doesn't turn to face him. "Rest?" she repeats bitterly. "You threw me in a dungeon, then dragged me into your world of gold and silence. And now I'm supposed to sleep?" Kale's jaw tightens. "I protected you," he says, as though the word should mean something to her. Finally, she faces him, eyes sharp, shoulders squared. "Protected me?" she echoes. "No, my king. You claimed me. There's a difference." The words hang in the air, sharper than steel. Kale's expression flickers, the faintest crack in his composure. "You think kindness is ownership?" "I think you're used to taking," she snaps. "And when someone doesn't break, you call it mercy." For a long moment, neither speaks. The fire crackles low, the only sound between them. Then Kale steps closer, his presence cold and magnetic. "You mistake me, Lyra. I don't want to own you." His voice drops rougher now. "I just don't want to lose you." Her heart betrays her with a quick, traitorous beat. "Lose me?" she whispers. "To what?" His gaze darkens. "To yourself, to the fire that will burn this world if you keep defying it." She steps back, refusing to yield. "Then let it burn. I'd rather die free than live tamed." Cale's breath catches, not from anger but something deeper, something he spent years burying beneath duty and ice. He turns away, his voice low. "You're the first to ever speak to me like that. And you're the first king who doesn't scare me," she says softly. "But don't mistake that for love." He pauses at the doorway, hand resting on the cold iron frame. Without looking back, he murmurs, "Then don't make me wish it were." The door closes behind him, leaving Lyra alone, trembling not from fear, but from the dangerous truth she refuses to name. The words stop her cold. For a heartbeat, Lyra forgets the distance between them, the titles, the walls, the invisible boundaries that have always defined their worlds. Kyle stands before her, not as the Alpha King, but as a man stripped bare of command. The torchlight flickers against his face, revealing a war behind his eyes, one between duty and desire, crown and conscience. "You speak of chains," she whispers, her voice trembling with something that isn't fear. "But yours are made of gold. Mine were iron." Kyle steps closer, his tone low, almost pleading. "Gold still binds, Lyra. You think I'm free because I sit on a throne? Every decision I make is another link in my cage." His honesty cuts deeper than cruelty ever did. Lyra wants to hate him, to remind herself that this is the man who took her freedom. Yet, looking at him now, she sees a prisoner too. She shakes her head, trying to harden her voice. "You could end this. You could let me go." "I could," Cale admits softly. "But I won't." Lyra's eyes flash. "Because you think I belong to you?" He takes another step forward until the air between them tightens, alive with tension. "No," he says, his voice cracking with emotion he doesn't understand. "Because for the first time in my life I don't know what belongs to me anymore." Silence fills the chamber. Her pulse pounds against her throat. His scent, sharp with frost and power, surrounds her like a cage she doesn't want to escape. "You want to free me?" she murmurs, looking up at him. "Then stop looking at me like I'm something precious you can't touch." Kyle's gaze falters. "And if I already have?" Lyra's breath catches. The fire in his eyes isn't hunger. It's longing, restrained, desperate, dangerous. She turns away before he can see the turmoil in her own face. "Then you've already lost your freedom, my king." He smiles faintly, not with victory, but with defeat that feels almost sacred. "Perhaps I lost it the moment you refused to bow." He leaves her then, his footsteps fading into the hall. But his words linger, curling around her heart like smoke. "I no longer know where my chains end and yours begin." In the quiet hours of the palace, when torches cast long, trembling shadows along the marble floors, Lyra feels it, the pull that defies reason and rank. Every glance from Cale, every brush of his presence, threads a silent tether around her heart. He doesn't command her, doesn't threaten her. Yet his very being, the weight of his crown, the fire behind his frost-bound eyes, calls to something deep inside her. And she answers, even though every instinct screams to resist. Kyle, for his part, struggles in silence. The king who once ruled with ice now finds warmth in her defiance, a flame that cannot be extinguished by power or decree. Each time she laughs softly, each time she meets his gaze with unflinching courage, the walls around his heart crack further. They speak in careful words, loaded with meanings they dare not voice aloud. Every touch, a brush of hands while passing scrolls, the accidental lean of shoulders in the council chamber, binds them tighter. And yet, the world outside would never allow it. The court would call it treason, the council would call it madness, and the nobles would see it as weakness. Even in her chains, even in his crown. They are caught in a storm of obligation and desire, two souls tethered by circumstance and choice. In whispered moments before dawn when the palace is silent, they admit what they cannot say openly. "I cannot stop this," Kale murmurs. "Neither can I," Lyra replies, her voice barely more than a breath. It is a bond built not of submission or duty, but of recognition, two people seeing the truth in each other when no one else dares to. A forbidden bond, one neither can break, and yet neither fully understands its consequences. Beyond the gilded walls of the palace, unrest simmers into a storm. Rumors of Kale's favoritism toward Lyra, the prisoner who refused to bow, ripple through the city like wildfire. Whispers of rebellion turn into chants, and discontented nobles rally their followers, believing the king's judgment has faltered. Merchants close their shops in fear of riots, while soldiers patrol the streets, struggling to contain a tide of anger that seems to grow with each passing day. Fires flare in the outer districts, signaling the start of organized resistance, and messengers arrive daily with grim news of skirmishes at the city gates. In the midst of this chaos, Lyra watches from her private wing, tension coiling tight in her chest. She knows that every glance from Kale, every secret meeting, only fuels the court's fury. And yet, she cannot deny the thrill of being at the center of a power so great, so dangerous, that it could crush her or raise her beyond imagination. Kale, aware of the growing threat, moves through the palace like a shadow of authority, making calculated decisions to protect both his throne and the woman who has stirred emotions long buried under ice and duty. Yet he cannot deny that Lyra's presence has changed him, softening his cruelty, igniting courage, and making him vulnerable to both love and treachery. Outside, banners rise bearing slogans of revolt. The people demand his downfall, seeing his compassion for a single Omega as a weakness to exploit. The kingdom teeters on the edge of war, and within the palace, Kyle and Lyra realize that their forbidden bond is not just a private danger. It could cost the king his crown and Lyra her life. In the dead of night, while the palace sleeps under a heavy silence, the king's council moves with silent precision. Shadows slip through hidden passages, keys turn in locks, and the heavy iron doors of the dungeons groan open. Lyra, already restless in her chambers, senses a sudden shift in the air, the hush of betrayal creeping like a cold wind. Whispers echo down the corridors. The council has spread rumors that Lyra has been conspiring with the rebels, plotting to overthrow the king from within. Documents and forged letters are placed strategically for discovery, painting her as the mastermind behind the growing rebellion. Every careful step Kale had taken to protect her is undermined in a single night. By morning, the palace is in uproar. Guards burst into Lyra's wing, declaring her a traitor. Nobles gasp in shock, and even loyal courtiers hesitate, their eyes flicking nervously toward Kale. The accusation is clear, yet the evidence is impossible to refute at a glance. Lyra is dragged to the dungeons once again, her dignity and freedom stripped away, her eyes burning with indignation and fear. Kale, enraged and betrayed, storms through the halls. He confronts the council, demanding answers, but their faces remain impassive, hiding the satisfaction of their treachery. Every plea he makes is met with cold legalism, a meticulous trap designed to weaken him and tarnish his reputation. Inside the dungeon, Lyra's heart races, but her spirit does not break. She knows she must survive, not just for herself, but for Kale, who now stands powerless against the council's machinations. The flickering torchlight casts long shadows across the stone walls, foreshadowing the coming storm where loyalties will be tested and the king's true strength will be revealed. The clatter of armored boots echoes through the palace hall as soldiers seize Lyra, their grip harsh but calculated. Her hands are bound in iron cuffs, and despite the tightness, her eyes blaze with defiance. She struggles against them, every step a reminder of the betrayal that has ensnared her so thoroughly. Kale bursts onto the scene moments too late. The doors slam behind the soldiers, cutting him off from her. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from the fury and helplessness coursing through him. He screams orders, but the guards, loyal to the council's treachery, ignore him. Every moment the soldiers pull Lyra further away is a dagger in his chest. As she is dragged down winding staircases and through darkened corridors, Lyra casts a glance over her shoulder. Their eyes meet, hers filled with silent trust and a challenge. Survive this, and come for me. Kale clenches his fists, his mind racing. He can feel the weight of the crown and the trap laid by his council, yet one thought dominates. He will not lose her to their schemes. The corridors open into the outer prison yard, and Lyra is shoved toward the stone cages where accused rebels are held. The clanging of chains resonates like a death knell. Guards laugh cruelly, unaware that the bond between Lyra and Kyle is stronger than any cell or chain. Kyle watches helplessly from the hall above, his heart pounding with a plan forming even as the council's shadowed plots try to claim victory. He knows that mere force won't win her back. Cunning, deception, and timing will be his weapons now. The first light of dawn stretches across the cold stone courtyard, casting long shadows over the assembled crowd. Lyra stands at the center, her wrists still bound, her chin lifted high despite the guards hemming her in. The air is thick with tension, whispers of pity and fear mingling as the people witness the spectacle. The council members, draped in ceremonial robes, declare her guilty of treason, rebellion, and inciting unrest among the people. Their voices ring out like hammers striking stone. By the decree of the king's council, this traitor shall be executed at sunrise. Let her death remind all that the king's law is absolute. Lyra's heart pounds, but she remains outwardly calm, the fire of defiance still flickering in her eyes. Around her, the soldiers tighten their grip, though none dare look her fully in the face. She senses the fear they feel, the unease beneath their disciplined exteriors. From the balcony, Kale watches silently, his icy mask in place, though inside, every nerve is taut with rage and desperation. He knows that by the council's law, intervening openly would brand him a traitor as well. Yet the sight of Lyra facing death, unwavering, ignites something primal within him, a storm of love, fury, and unyielding determination. The executioner sharpens his blade, its edge glinting in the morning light. The gathered nobles murmur their satisfaction, certain of their triumph. But Lyra is no ordinary Omega. She has survived far worse than fear itself. She closes her eyes briefly, drawing on her courage, on the bond she shares with Kyle, and on the knowledge that this dawn is only a moment, not the end. The sky above the capital is a churning mass of dark clouds, lightning flashing like the wrath of the gods themselves. Kyle mounts his black stallion, muscles taut with urgency, his armor glinting dimly in the storm's brief illuminations. The wind whips around him, carrying the distant sounds of the city and the faint cries of the crowd gathered for Lyra's execution. Every heartbeat is a drum of determination. The council's decree means nothing now. The law has no power over the bond that has formed between him and Lyra. With a force born of desperation, he urges his horse forward, the rain lashing against his face like icy needles. In the courtyard below, the executioner raises his blade, unaware that the storm heralds a coming reckoning. Kyle rides through the gates as if the heavens themselves part for him, his eyes fixed solely on the Omega who dared defy the kingdom. Lightning strikes nearby, illuminating the fear in the council's faces, and the growing disbelief that the cold king would dare challenge their authority. Kyle reaches the courtyard gates, splintering them with a strength fueled by fury and love. Soldiers and counselors scatter in panic as the king dismounts, cloak plastered to his armor, every movement radiating command and raw power. The storm mirrors the chaos of the moment, thunder shaking the stones as Kale steps forward, hand outstretched toward Lyra. "Hold on," he growls, voice carrying over the tempest. "I will not let them take you from me. Not now, not ever." The executioner falters, the crowd gasps, and the dawn trembles on the edge of a new chapter. Lyra, heart pounding with hope and fear, reaches toward him, sensing that the storm is more than weather. It is the fury of a king who has chosen love over law. Cale's storm of fury shows no restraint. Even the men who once called him master now raise their weapons against him, bound by loyalty to the council's law. But their oaths crumble under the force of his wrath. With every swing of his sword and every strike of his shield, Cale cuts a path toward Lyra, a hurricane of unstoppable determination. Sparks fly as steel meets steel. His generals shout orders, but Cale ignores them, his focus entirely on the woman at the center of the courtyard. Each strike is precise, powerful, driven not only by skill but by a desperate need to save her life. He parries against men who trained for this very day, but none can match the ferocity born of love and defiance. Lyra watches from the scaffold, her heart hammering with terror and hope. She sees Cale's cloak torn, armor dented, yet his eyes are unyielding, fixed entirely on her. The guards, sensing the king's wrath and unbreakable will, hesitate. Doubt flickers across their faces. Loyalty to the throne clashes with the undeniable power and authority radiating from their ruler. With a final roar, Cale bursts through the last line of resistance, standing before Lyra, drenched in rain and blood, but unbroken. The storm around them seems to pause, holding its breath in awe of the king who defies all, his own men, the council, the law, for the woman he loves. "Hold my hand," he commands, voice cutting through the chaos. "We live together, or not at all." The iron cuffs fall clanging to the stone floor, echoing like the toll of fate. Rain pours over the courtyard, soaking both king and prisoner, turning the world into a blur of silver and shadows. Lyra steps back, brushing her wrists as she flexes them for the first time in days, a spark of defiance still burning in her eyes. Cale kneels beside her, chest heaving, dripping with mud and blood. For a fleeting moment his gaze falters, not out of fear for his enemies, but because her words pierce deeper than any blade. "You're the prisoner now, not me," she whispers, her voice both teasing and haunting. The weight of his crown, the burdens of the throne, the oaths and betrayals, all pressed down on him suddenly with a clarity he has not felt in years. Lyra steps closer, her hand brushing his cheek. There's no fear in her touch, only the raw truth of someone who has survived the impossible and refuses to bow. Kyle's hands, the very hands that shattered her chains, tremble slightly as they hover near hers. He realizes, painfully, that in saving her, he has trapped himself, not with iron or law, but with the impossible gravity of her spirit. For once he is not the king of all he surveys. He is bound, willingly and hopelessly, by the Omega he swore to protect. The storm rages around them, but in that moment, all the noise, all the chaos, fades. The chains are gone, yet Cale feels more confined than ever, a prisoner of the very heart he tried to command. Flames lick the night sky, sending waves of heat and sparks into the streets. The capital that once symbolized Cale's iron rule is now a maelstrom of chaos. Soldiers clashing, citizens screaming, and the council scrambling in fear. Every corner they turn is fraught with danger, yet Lyra and Cale move as one, their breaths synchronized, hearts racing in tandem. Lyra's hands, once shackled and trembling, now grip Kyle's arm with determination. The storm of rebellion outside the palace mirrors the storm inside her, fear interwoven with defiance, and adrenaline fused with hope. She realizes the chains that bound her were never just physical. They were the weight of expectation, fear, and obedience. Kyle's expression is a study in intensity, his cold mask slipping to reveal the man beneath. The one who hesitates to kill when mercy is possible, who hesitates to rule when love calls him elsewhere. He leads her through secret passages known only to the royal family, passages lined with centuries of history and silent whispers of betrayal. Every step is a gamble, every shadow a potential threat, yet he does not falter. As they cross the outer walls, the horizon is painted with fire and smoke, the once great city crumbling behind them. Lyra senses the gravity of the moment. The kingdom may fall, The council may perish, but they are free. Her spirit, once caged, now soars alongside him. Kyle glances at her, and for the first time, his eyes are not the eyes of a king ruling through fear, but of a man humbled by the courage of an Omega who refused to bow. They reach a forest outside the capital, its dense canopy offering cover and anonymity. The cool night air replaces the suffocating smoke, carrying the scent of wet earth and possibility. In the distance, the echoes of chaos are muffled by trees, and for the first time in her life, Lyra feels not just relief, but the intoxicating thrill of choice. Kyle pauses, taking her hands in his, the weight of the crown and the firelight reflected in his gaze. The capital may burn, he says quietly, but we are not prisoners of this world anymore. Lyra nods, feeling the final chains of her past fall away. Their journey is only the beginning, and as they vanish into the shadowed forest, a twist awaits, one that will challenge not only their freedom, but the future of the kingdom itself. The forest stretches endlessly, a green sanctuary away from the burning capital. Here there are no courtiers, no council, no expectations, only the whispering wind and the soft rustle of leaves. Kale removes the weight of the crown from his head, setting it on a moss-covered rock. The gold and jewels, once symbols of absolute power, now feel like chains he willingly discards. Lyra watches him, her heart swelling with a mix of admiration and relief. She sees the man behind the king, the one who learned to trust, to feel, and to fight not for control, but for love. In his eyes, there is a vulnerability that the throne never allowed him to show. Freedom, Kale murmurs, running his fingers over the intricate designs of the crown one last time, was never something I could keep while ruling through fear. With you, I understand what it truly means. Lyra smiles, her hands brushing against his. And I never thought I'd see the day an Alpha King would choose an Omega over his crown. They sit together under the starlit sky, the ruins of the Empire far behind them. Every decision that led them here, the rebellion, the betrayals, the deathly games, the court's plotting, culminates in this singular moment of peace. They are no longer bound by title, rank, or expectation. They are simply two souls choosing each other in a world that once demanded subservience and obedience. Yet even in exile, danger lurks in the shadows. News of the king's abdication spreads like wildfire. Factions that survived the uprising begin maneuvering for power, and whispers reach them even in their forest refuge. Freedom is fragile, and the choice to flee the capital may be only the beginning of a new, darker trial. Lyra and Kale hold each other close, knowing that whatever comes next, they face it together. And in that unity, they find a strength neither crown nor army could provide, a bond forged not in obedience, but in courage, love, and defiance. In the quiet valley, dawn paints the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the air is filled with the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. Lyra stands atop a gentle hill, looking down at the small clearing where they've made a temporary home. Beside her, Kale removes the last vestiges of his regal armor, leaving behind the weight of a throne that no longer defines him. She turns to him, her eyes sparkling with both mischief and triumph. "You once kept me in a cage," she says softly, her hand brushing his. "But now, we both live unbound." Kale's lips curl into a rare, genuine smile, the first in years that isn't hidden behind duty, fear, or power. "And yet," he replies, his voice low but steady, "freedom comes with its own battles. There are those who won't forgive me for abandoning the crown, and enemies who may never rest." Lyra nods, feeling the truth in his words. The path ahead is uncertain, but for the first time, they will face it together, not as king and prisoner, nor as Alpha and Omega, but as equals united by choice, courage, and a love forged in defiance. In that moment, the valley feels like a kingdom of their own making, vast, wild, and free. The whispers of the past fade, replaced by the heartbeat of a new beginning. And deep in her chest, Lyra knows this isn't the end. It's the threshold of a greater adventure, one that will test their bond and challenge everything they thought they knew about power, loyalty, and love. The camera of imagination pulls back. The valley stretches endlessly, hinting at distant lands, shadowed forests, and forgotten ruins, setting the stage for the next epic tale.